Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Welcome back, everyone. I normally start off the show by saying what a bananas week that I have had. And that is true, but for many different reasons. I announced the music festival that I plan and host every year outside of a ridiculous, deadly pandemic. But it is back. It's called the Rock and Roll Rumble. It runs 9 nights throughout April at the Middle East and Sonia in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 24 bands participate. You're all invited. Welcome new patrons, HB Superstar Supporter, Top Tier, Honorary Show Producer, and the brand new Wicked Cool Devil Dog. And thanks to my earliest supporters, Lisa McColgan and Rhiannon Superstars, Sandy with an I, Pat New Hampshire Total Gems and Wicked Cool, Rebecca Dominique, I don't want to forget John F. and Barbara, who dropped tip in the tip jar. It is a lovely problem to have several supporters and worry that you have forgotten to thank someone. So thank you all very, very much. I could go on and tell you a lot more about the things that have happened in my life, but that's not why you're here. You're here for Crime of the Truest Kind. In the headlines this past week, national crime headlines, a woman and her husband were stalked and murdered in their home in Redmond, Washington, just outside Seattle. That is horrifying. That is tragic. We want to prevent things like that from happening. And here's why I'm telling you. Cairo Channel 7 reported that a woman and her husband were shot and killed early Friday morning, March 10th. Investigators say a 38-year-old Texas truck driver became obsessed after he became a fan of her by following her online show on the Clubhouse app. It's a live streaming feature not unlike something like Facebook Live or Twitter Spaces. It was a stalking case severe enough that the chief of police was briefed about a protection order that the woman had filed a week before her murder. Initially, it was a stalking case that is now a double murder-suicide investigation. The people who were killed, 38-year-old Zohri Sadeghi and her husband, 35-year-old Mohammed Milad Nasiri. Court documents identified the suspect as a 38-year-old man from Texas. Do I need to name him? I don't. The protection order details how the suspect had been in contact with her for more than a year, but the stalking escalated in November of 2022 when she told him to stop communicating with her. That is when he started to overwhelm her with calls and messages and flowers and gifts and began showing up to her home in person. According to the Cairo report, the suspect and victim met via a podcast-type chat app that was specifically for Farsi-speaking individuals seeking employment in the tech industry. She became very concerned, and she and her husband did all of the right things. They ceased communication, and she tried to protect herself and her family the best way she knew possible. They couldn't locate this man because of the nature of his job. He was a truck driver. They couldn't locate him. They couldn't serve him with the restraining order. And as a result, he came to their home, broke in, and murdered them. I don't want to alarm you. As someone who has been in broadcast radio for a number of years, I have experienced stalking situations, and they are very scary. I'll cite a couple of incidents. One, an individual made his way into the building that I worked at. I worked on the 24th floor of the Prudential Tower in downtown Boston. It's a very recognized part of Boston's skyline. I worked on the 24th floor at a radio station that was there at the time. This person somehow was allowed to come up from the lobby into the 24th floor and walked into the radio studio. I was not there at the time, but this person walked in when my colleague was on the air, and he acted as though we were really close friends. I had never met him in my life, and I heard from this colleague, "Hey, this person named this is here to see you." I was terrified, because if I were there, I would have been alone with this person who walked into the radio studio. I don't know what would have happened. Same person showed up at an event. Now, as a radio broadcaster, as a radio host, you're a public person. You talk about the locations you're going to be at on the radio, hoping other people will come there, hoping the public will show up. This same person walked into a public event, and I fortunately was surrounded by a lot of people that I knew, and someone walked me out to my car and followed me a couple miles before I got away from where we were. One more instance and we'll move into this week's featured stories. One morning, I came out to my car early in the morning. I had been at the radio station the night previous, parked in my driveway, got into my car, put it in reverse to back out of my driveway. I could not see through the glass of my back window. I got out to look, and feces was smeared all over the back of my window. I was horrified. I don't know the word to express to you about how I felt when I saw that. But I was aware I had this particular stalker person. I called the police of the town that I lived in at the time, and their response to me was, "Well, there's really not a lot we can do about it. We can send an officer over to take a report, but there's nothing we can do about it." And there really wasn't anything that they could do about it. The town wasn't going to be able to do anything about it. But what I was able to do about it, when this particular person, there were other incidents with other people, but this particular one, I was able to file a report with the city of Boston. This person got called into court. We sat before a magistrate, and that person was ordered to be hospitalized. And that person was sent to a mental health facility for at least 30 days. Now, what became of that person today, I'm not sure, but I hope that eventually they got the help that they needed, and they didn't do the same thing to anyone else. So I say all of that to say this. Please be very careful. If you are a podcaster or a content creator or somebody that puts themselves into the public eye in some way, please be very careful. I tell you all the time, please lock your doors. That is not just a folksy tagline. That is something very serious. Lock your doors, lock your car doors, be aware of your surroundings, make sure people know where you're going, make sure people know where you are. Don't share a lot of personal details about yourselves. Don't share where you live. Be very careful. It's really troubling to read a story like that. And I talked about it online with a few folks. And there were some fellow podcasters who said to me, "Can I share your information?" I said, "Of course you can." Information about this news story. And, their response was, "Never even occurred to us." I'm like, please, it needs to occur to you that there's danger all around us. We do crime. We do crime. We write about crime. We talk about crime. Please be very careful. Keep some of your private life private. And yes, of course, lock your goddamn doors. Something a little different this week, kind of a shorty. I wrote this script with the intention of giving you some true crime content without spending the vast amount of time that I put into one story. So this is 3 cases, 2 cold cases identified, 1 cold case solved. We go to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The years are 1978 and 1971. In Granby, Massachusetts, a woman known as Granby Girl lay buried in the town cemetery with a headstone marked as unknown, November 15th, 1978, in God's care. This is the day her body was found, on that logging road off Amherst Road in the agricultural and residential community of just 6,200 people. It's located in the lower Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts. There she had been found buried in the leaves, and she had been shot in the head. Investigators knew nothing more, and no one had been reported missing. The medical examiner's office ruled that the unknown woman's cause of death was a bullet wound to the temple, and the manner of death was homicide. They estimated that she had been killed in June of 1978, and that she had been between 19 and 27 years old. Fast forward decades later to March 2022, when her DNA was submitted to a forensic lab in Texas with the hope that a viable DNA sample could be extracted. In January 2023, the lab finally found a relative. It was a woman living in Maryland. Police made contact with this woman, a niece, who told them that her aunt had gone missing decades earlier, and she would give the police the names of her aunt's 2 sons, the woman's cousins, for the sake of this story. One of those sons confirmed that his mother went missing when he was just 5 years old. He would submit DNA for testing. Comparison of Matthew Dale's DNA to that of Granby Girl's DNA resulted in a 100% match. His mother was 28-year-old Patricia Ann Tucker, who went missing in the summer of 1978. Born July 28, 1950, she had been married a few times and had also used the names Patricia Heckman and Patricia Dale. At the time of her disappearance and death, she was known as Patricia Coleman and had married a man named Gerald Coleman in November 1977 and had been living with him in East Hampton, Connecticut. East Hampton is nearly 60 miles from Granby, where she was found. And if you might be thinking that Gerald Coleman sounds sketchy, you'd be correct. He is considered a person of interest in Patricia's death. He never reported his wife missing. According to reports, Matthew Dale told police that on August 8, 1978, his mother's new husband, Gerald Coleman, dropped him off at an acquaintance's home in Massachusetts, and he never heard from him again. In announcing the news of Patricia's identification during a news conference on Monday, March 6th of this year, First Assistant Northwestern District Attorney Stephen Gagney said, "We do not yet formally have probable cause to charge anyone in Patricia's murder," and added they hope Monday's news conference will trigger some additional leads. Authorities want to speak with people who knew Patricia Tucker at any point in her life, but especially during the time she was married to Coleman. Hairs recovered from her body are being analyzed for DNA. Coleman is certainly, at a minimum, a person of strong interest in Patricia's disappearance and death. Gerald Coleman did not slip out of sight, however, and in 1995 he was convicted on charges including rape and assault, on whom I don't know, and he died in prison in 1996. Matthew Dale said in a statement read at the news conference, "Thank you for never giving up on her." Anyone with information about this case is urged to contact the Granby, Massachusetts police at 413-467-9222. Email jwhite, letter J, white, at granbypd.org, or by submitting a message through granbypd.org. Another identification in a long, cold New England case came in January. An unsolved and unidentified case for more than 50 years. It was October 6th, 1971, in Bedford, New Hampshire, when the remains of an unidentified woman were found in a wooded area at the end of Kilton Road, near the Route 101 bypass off the Everett Turnpike. That's about 20 miles north of the Massachusetts border. Investigators determined the body was a white female, aged 25 to 35, between 5 feet and 5 feet 4 inches tall, with brown hair. She was found wearing a maroon pullover shirt with a lace collar, 1970s-style hip-hugger dungaree shorts, and a pair of size 7 sandals. There was nothing with her or at the scene that could give authorities any information on who this woman was. And based on her condition, she was there from 1 to 3 months before her body was discovered. And the location she was found at the time was a wooded area off the highway. Investigators could not determine her specific cause of death due to how long her body had been out there exposed to the elements. But they do know the woman they found had been murdered. For 2 years, beginning in 2020, forensic testing was done with the help of genetic genealogists with the DNA Doe Project to identify the girl on Kilton Road. In January of 2023, officials announced that the woman, who didn't have a name like the Granby Girl or the Lady of the Dunes, well, now, that girl found on Kilton Road was identified as 26-year-old Katherine Alston of Boston, Massachusetts. Kathy, as those close to her called her, was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts in 1945. She graduated from Dorchester High School in 1963. That school doesn't exist anymore. One interesting thing I learned about Dorchester High was one of its famous alum, Ray Bolger, dancer, actor, and played a role many of us have seen. He was the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, one of the most famous movies ever made. Katherine would go on to attend Boston University. And in November of 1967, when Katherine was 22, she married a fellow BU student, Ralph Lawson Garrett Jr., at Second Church in Newton, Mass. After their Jamaican honeymoon, they lived in Cambridge. They would divorce by the time she went missing. Amicably, we think, though we have nothing to go on, because Ralph Garrett Jr. is dead. But what happened in 1971? When she disappeared, Katherine Alston was living at 36 Beacon Street in Boston with a roommate, who investigators did not call as a suspect, but did identify him in the investigation. He was David Cormier. Their apartment was across from Boston Common, a large park in the middle of the city. It is there where you can see the new sculpture, The Embrace. Created by sculptor Hank Willis Thomas, it was installed in the Boston Common in the winter of 2022. The bronze figural abstraction, as it is called, is based on a photo of an embrace between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King after he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. It's 20 feet tall by 25 feet wide. In person, it is extraordinary. I have seen it. I will share pictures on the internet. It is something to behold. Contrary to some of the rather entertaining postings about it on the internet. Katherine Alston's family would move from Massachusetts to Texas. where her father's family was from. And Kathy was supposed to meet them at Logan Airport for their flight to Texas, but she never showed up. No one in her family ever saw or spoke to her again. Katherine Alston was never officially reported missing. There are no records that show that her family or her roommate filed a missing persons report. But for many years after, they tried to identify her. The New Hampshire Department of Justice shared the process in a press release that came when they announced her identity. In 1993 and again in 2006, the New Hampshire State Police and Office of the Chief Medical Examiner consulted with experts in the fields of clay facial reconstruction to create an impression of her appearance. Those are difficult, let's be honest. For someone to see them and say, yeah, that's my loved one, it's difficult, but they had to try. In 2020, through the advancements in technology, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit attempted a digital reconstruction to identify her. None of their attempts were successful in finding out who their Jane Doe was. That girl on Kilton Road. Photos of these facial reconstructions are posted at crimeofthetruestkind.com. You can go and look at them. I do heart science because in 2020, the New Hampshire State Police Major Crime Unit targeted DNA, teaming with the DNA Doe Project to use genetic genealogy in an attempt to find a relative. They were able to discover a likely genetic match from her DNA profile with a direct-to-consumer DNA test that had been submitted by a member of Katherine's family in Texas. So your over-the-counter variety ancestry DNA kits. And I don't know that that is the brand specifically. In a quick web search, though, there are all sorts of direct-to-consumer kits. Clinic-grade sperm analysis, fetal gender testing. You can also find out what breeds make up your rescue dog. Mine are bulldog and pug, each very obvious. No need to check. Investigators confirmed a genetic match, a hit. When contacted, her siblings confirmed they did not see or hear from their sister Kathy ever again. This is a very old case, and investigators are seeking information from anyone who knew Dan Cormier or Katherine Alston. That includes people who lived in Dorchester, Boston, and Somerville between 1963 and the fall of 1971. So we're talking about parents and grandparents, great-grandparents for some of you. Students who attended Boston University from 1963 to 1967 might remember Katherine Alston from her time on campus. Anyone with information is asked to contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit at 603-271-2663. Email coldcaseunit@dos.nh.gov, and there was a tip form linked at crimeofthetruestkind.com in the show notes. Now we move north to Burlington, Vermont. Burlington, Vermont's oldest murder mystery has been solved. On Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, investigators named their killer in this 50-plus-year-old murder case. Rita Curran was a 24-year-old second-grade teacher when she was violently murdered in her Burlington apartment in the summer of 1971. That is the same period of time that we believe that Katherine Alston was killed. The cases are not related, but Rita's murder did implicate a notorious serial killer. In June of that year, Rita Curran had left her parents' home in Milton, Vermont, and headed to Burlington. It's about 25 miles away. It was the first time that Rita had moved away to live on her own. With all the eligible men in Milton spoken for, she was looking for connection, adventure, and possibly romance. It was the early 70s, and so much focus was placed on marriage and family. Rita was also devoutly Catholic, and a 24-year-old single girl was hearing about it from all sides. Now, there's nothing wrong with being single. There was also nothing wrong with wanting to find love. Rita was called quiet, sweet, and almost painfully shy. A talented singer who, by all accounts, was kind and smart and hardworking. and a dedicated second-grade teacher. Staff and students loved her, and she definitely loved her students. The apartment at 17 Brooks Ave was within a 5-minute walk to the University of Vermont campus. She had found a listing in the Burlington Free Press looking for a roommate for the summer. She would share the place with 2 other young women that were her same age. It's a very college town thing to do. Well, it's also a very whatever you can afford when you need a place thing to do. Anyone in the Boston area remember the Phoenix listings? Pre-Craigslist? Yep. I found a few roommate situations that way when I was in school. While Rita didn't know these roommates, the rent was what she could afford with the job that she had picked up cleaning motel rooms while she was taking graduate courses at UVM that summer. What added to the mystery, the creepier part to an already disturbing story, is that Rita worked at the Colonial Motor Inn in South Burlington. The Motor Inn was near the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. Now, what kind of relevance might that have to this case? Notorious serial killer Ted Bundy was born at the Lund home. A theory grew from author Ann Rule's 1980 book, The Stranger Beside Me, where she had reason to believe that Bundy visited Burlington in the summer of 1971. This is after he learned the truth of his birth mother, and after he shared that with Ann Rule, when the two were working side by side at a suicide hotline in Seattle. I won't get too deep into the Bundy case. Every inch of it has been covered. He grew up believing that his mother was his sister. Learning the person he thought was his sister was actually his mother had great effect on him, and that the man he believed to be his father was quite cruel. He was a man reported to be an extremely violent and frightening individual who abused animals and attacked people who made him angry. Bundy said he had gotten into his father's pornographic magazine collection at a young age, and that contributed to his violent behavior. Was there a case for Ted Bundy being Rita Curran's killer? He was actively murdering women at the time. We just didn't know it yet. Rita's murder was brutal, and her sister had written to Bundy asking if he was the one who killed her. He was questioned. He denied any involvement. And you may remember, he started talking quite a lot then, a strategy he thought might buy him some time. Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair on January 24th, 1989. What we know about Rita's last moments. On Monday, July 19th, Rita had worked at the inn from 8:15 a.m. to about 2:40 p.m. and went to her barbershop quartet practice that night, getting home after 10 p.m. Rita was last seen at approximately 11:20. That is the time when her roommates Beverly Lampfer and Carrie Duane, along with boyfriend Paul Robinson, headed to a late-night restaurant. They invited Rita to join them, but she declined. Girl was tired. She was up early cleaning motel rooms. She went to band practice. The roommates left, leaving the apartment unlocked, as was commonplace for the times. But you know what I say about that. Forever and always. Yes, lock your doors. Rita Curran's murder shocked the city of Burlington to its core. Locals feared that big city crime was coming their way. It was a horror unknown to them. And it was a place like so many we have heard about. Nobody locked their doors. But her murder was a turning point. After July 20th, 1971, hardware stores found a 20% increase in the sale of locks. In a piece by the Daily Beast from 2021, Paul Robinson, who was the boyfriend of one of Rita Curran's roommates, said this kind of horror was unheard of in Burlington, Vermont. It was a very innocent time, and I can't tell you how fast deadbolts flew off the shelves after Rita's murder. Burlington police would report more outside lights being left on than ever before. When the three of them returned to the apartment, they just hung out talking in the living room. There was no cause for concern. They had all just thought that Rita went to bed. That's until Beverly found her in their shared bedroom. She was naked. Her clothes appeared to have been torn off. Her hair still set in curlers. Authorities believed she was attacked while getting ready for bed. She was killed around midnight on July 19th into the 20th. She was found beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted, with only a few reports include that assault included an object. I found a great blog in doing a little bit of Ted Bundy research when he was initially connected to Rita Curran's murder. They write this: "She was sexually assaulted, but not raped. Her torn panties were discovered under her body. Neighbors did not report hearing screams or any other disturbance. Rita's purse, containing about $20, was untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. For the curious, $20 in 1971 is the equivalent of about $150 today. There was no sign of forced entry, as the girls generally left their apartment unlocked, but bloodstains indicated that the killer left through the kitchen and out the back door. No usable fingerprints were found. This grisly murder was one of Vermont's most notorious unsolved mysteries. Who killed Rita Curran? It was a question her family thought would go unanswered. What happened in that 70-minute window of time? And who wanted to hurt Rita? The Burlington Free Press had reported that Rita was receiving late-night phone calls, heavy breathing, and silence. She had told friends about it. In the weeks after her murder, police got reports of similar activity from other women. More women reported late-night intruders, peeping toms who took off when they all screamed. All of this in the vicinity of UVM. Detective Lieutenant Richard Bolio said his men were checking for a connection between Rita's murder and several other assaults on young women in the Burlington area. Reports came in about home invasions, where one, a 20-year-old woman, was woken up at 4 a.m. and raped by an assailant described as a teenager. Another was a woman woken up and attacked by a knife-wielding stranger, not far from Rita's apartment. That suspect took off when the woman began screaming, dropping the knife as they ran. I can't be sure if they were ever caught or arrested. Years passed and nothing came of Rita Patricia Curran's case, until a few years ago and the advancements in science. Something collected at the scene of Rita's gruesome murder was what blew the case wide open. Her murder had long gone cold, but in 2019, Burlington Police Lieutenant James Trebe compiled a team to rework the case as if it had just happened, looking at it through new eyes and new technology. The key piece of evidence was a cigarette butt that had been found near Rita's body. And to the extraordinary credit of whomever the detectives were in 1971, we were years away from DNA. And the top-rated detective show in 1971 I learned was something called Mannix. I had never heard of that before today. I only bring that up because today we are a society of CSI and law and order, and the cops are on to everything. The found cigarette brand was a lark. Sounds old, doesn't it? And any TV detective would have something to say about that. I know Poker Face starring Natasha Lyonne would. Lark in 1971 wasn't really that old of a cigarette brand. They came on the scene in 1963 with some bullshit about how their charcoal filter was safe. Everybody smoked cigarettes back then. Doctors did advertisements for cigarettes. My parents used to smoke Winston Lights. Lights give a false sense of security too, don't they? And they made me buy them at Jerry's Variety Store in Groveland, Massachusetts. That store is still there. My Nana, the same who used to read those graphic detective magazines I told you about, she smelled something called Territons. They had a campaign that they'd take the piss out of someone before they'd switch to another brand of cigarettes. Hers were like 1000s. None of those brands are the oldest, by the way. It's Marathi, oldest cigarette brand in the world, and is still being sold today, going back to 1821. Sometimes I feel that old. And when you're an investigator trying to crack a 5+ decades old crime, every detail matters. It was a cigarette butt that would crack the oldest unsolved murder in Vermont state history. In 2014, previous investigators had sent the butt and other evidence for DNA analysis that did compile a DNA profile of the person who left that lark. But there was no match to any samples in DNA databases compiled by law enforcement. Then, in August 2022, detectives learned that the DNA sample pointed to someone who could finally be tied to Rita's murder. The sample had been traced to relatives of the person responsible. The man authorities now believe is responsible for Rita Curran's murder was identified as William DeRoos, a 31-year-old newlywed at the time, who'd gotten into an argument with his wife that night and took a walk to cool down. When he came back, he told his wife of 2 weeks not to say that he had gone out of the house at all. That is highly suspect. And she did cover for him and gave police an alibi for where he was when Rita was murdered. 5 decades later, she did give detectives a different story, the truth. In 2019, after the investigation was reopened or renewed, as the VT Digger wrote, detectives interviewed DeRoos's wife, Michelle, again. This time, she told them he had left the house, that it was during the time that Rita's roommates had gone out for that late-night dinner. DNA matched William DeRoos, who lived in the 3rd-floor apartment at 17 Brooks Avenue, upstairs from Rita Curran. A DNA profile generated from this discarded cigarette butt to existing genetic data available on an open-source ancestry website led police to DeRoos's half-brother in Alabama to confirm their findings. Further DNA from the housecoat Rita was wearing that night was also tested, which helped to confirm her murderer. Investigators did question William and Michelle DeRoos after Rita's body was found. They were neighbors within the same apartment building. When they were questioned, they said they were both at home, together, and nobody had left their apartment. We now know Michelle DeRoos lied for her husband about that night, and they said they didn't hear anything. Now that's something. Rita resisted. She fought for her life, and no one heard anything. Police are confident that William DeRoos is the person who killed Rita. He had opportunity. Rita would be 76 this year. William DeRoos, 83. But he won't be arrested and he will not face trial in her murder. It's because he's dead. In 1986, DeRoos died of a drug overdose in a hotel room in San Francisco, without ever facing charges for Rita's brutal sexual assault and murder. Not long after Rita's murder, his first marriage ended and Michelle DeRoos left Vermont and landed in Oregon. Years later, she would tell investigators that she had given him a false alibi on the night of the murder. She did not know he had done anything and will not face charges in the case. William DeRoos left Burlington for Thailand to become a monk. Some reports calling him a guru during this time. He would resurface in San Francisco in 1974 when he met his second wife, Sarah Hepting. Detectives contacted that second wife, who told them during an interview last year that DeRoos was prone to sudden bursts of violence, citing incidents against her and others. He once stabbed a woman in a surprise attack right in front of her, and later said he thought he stabbed his wife. He strangled her so violently once that she lost consciousness, not unlike how Rita died. but so much worse. Rita had died fighting. Police say she put up a brutal struggle against her killer. That is why it's difficult to believe that no one had heard anything. After 51 years of waiting for answers, members of Rita's family are gone. Her parents didn't get to see any kind of justice. Not that a dead killer is justice, but it is an answer to one of their decades-long questions. Who did this, and why? We now know the who, but we never find out why. Rita Curran's brother and sister met with the Burlington police before the press conference to learn what they had uncovered. They both spoke and thanked the department for its 5 decades of work. Her sister Mary Campbell said, "I am so proud of the kindness, the consideration, the caring, and the compassion that they've shown to us over the decades, over multiple administrations of multiple police chiefs, multiple officers over those years." Her brother, Tom Curran, said he was thinking about his family on that day, of his parents and what they went through. And Rita, not the man who had done this to her. Thank you for listening. Details, photos, and links on all the cases available at crimeofthetruestkind.com. There are so many unsolved and missing persons cases across New England. I will continue to share their information. Programming note: April is going to be exceedingly busy for me. Although my job situation has changed and will shift, I have a 9-night music festival that starts on April 6th. You're all invited to come. It's called the Rock and Roll Rumble. It happens in Cambridge. Public event, you are all invited to come. So I can't speak at this moment what my availability will be to write and record episodes in April. But I will say this. The 10th anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombings is April 15th. I would like to honor those directly involved and the city of Boston with an episode this month. So if you or anybody you know who was directly involved at the Boston Marathon on that day and witnessed any of the events or the subsequent events. The bombings happened on a Monday, Marathon Monday, the 15th. And the investigation went full throttle. And then the identities of the 2 men became known. And then the city turned into even greater chaos that spilled into other communities, like in Watertown. If anybody has any experiences, please reach out and tell me your story. crimeofthetruestkind@gmail.com. I will close with this short story. I have a friend who lives in Watertown. They just moved to a new apartment, and I was leaving after my first visit with them to their new place, and I was driving down this side street, and my chest got very tight. And that doesn't happen to me at all. And then I realized I was on the street in Watertown where the shootout took place. The 2 marathon bombing suspects went on the run, and they drove through different communities, and they ended up having a firefight in the street. This is a very small town. It's not like New York City. It's a very small town. They ended up having a firefight with police officers. The surviving marathon bomber brother got in the stolen car and went to take off and backed over his brother. His brother, his older brother, had been shot, probably still alive, but his younger brother ran him over. He probably killed his own brother. There was a lockdown. The older brother was dead. The younger brother was on the run. They locked down the city. But here's the thing about that. We were all on board. I'm sure there are some people that will say that their rights were violated or whatever the fuck. But the people of Boston and the surrounding towns we wanted to find those motherfuckers. So we obliged. We canceled everything. In fact, this festival that I'm talking about, we were in the middle of that. So the night of that shootout, we were in Central Square in Cambridge, about 2 blocks from where the security guard, the MIT security guard, Sean Collier, got murdered by these 2, who I will not name. You've probably figured that out. There are so many of us here in the Boston area who were not directly affected or involved with the events of those days. There's so many of us who were not at the finish line, who were not injured, who did not lose a loved one. But we were all affected. I remember one news commentator said something. It was Bill Maher on his HBO television show. He said something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, the people in Boston are acting like the marathon bombing was 9/11. Well, it kind of was for us. It kind of was like our 9/11. Our people got murdered. Our people lost limbs. Our people's lives were changed forever. We take that really personally. So if you have a story, please reach out. crimeofthetruestkind@gmail.com. Follow the show, Crime of the Truest Kind, everywhere. Online, Crime of the Truest Kind. Tell someone about the show. New England crime stories, regional history. And yeah, I throw in all my anecdotes. It's just what it is. Until next time, lock your goddamn doors.